Hello and welcome to the shop. A couple of weeks ago I did a video titled Chaos 2.0 where I glued a bunch of pin blanks together, cut them on a 45, shuffled the pieces, glued them together, repeated the process in the other direction, and they made some beautiful blanks. I ended up with 14 long blanks and 6 short blanks. Now, over on my other channel, What You Doin' Bob, that's my shop update channel, I asked folks to vote on which of the blanks they liked the best. And I also showed them a series of, maybe 8 or 10 pin kits and asked them to vote on the pin kit that they liked the best. And what I'm going to do today is I have my results. We had 55 people vote based on a pin kit or a blank. I've got a winner, and we're going to go ahead today and we're going to turn that pin for you. This should be fun. Once we turn the blank, we'll mate it to the kit they chose. And I think it'll be fun just to see how this Chaos 2.0 blank looks on a pin kit. Here's a quick look at the 14 blanks I was able to make out of my master blank. I also had a few smaller pieces I was able to make. These will be great for Sierra style pins, but I got 4 short blanks. I took a vote on my other channel. 55 people voted. They chose a Chicline kit from Penn State. I've got the pin kit laid out here. And the chosen blank was blank number 12. And I think they made a wise choice. That is a beautiful blank, and this is going to make a beautiful pin. I need to get this blank cut so that I can go ahead, drill it, and tube it. Now, just visually inspecting the blank, I personally find this end to be far more interesting. So I think that's the end that we're going to start from. I'm just going to lay my tube on there. I'm going to leave about 1/8 of an inch behind the tube. I'll put a mark here about 1/8 of an inch in front of the tube. And we'll do the same thing for the second half of the blank. I'm going to run this over to the bandsaw. We'll get this cut into 2 blanks. Let's go ahead and mark it so we can line things back up. Although with the Chaos blank, that's not as important. But I'm going to go ahead, head over to the bandsaw. We'll get this cut into 2 blanks, and then we'll drill it and tube it. I'll start by removing the little unneeded section on the far right-hand side, and then we'll split the blank in half. I've got the blank cut into the 2 needed sections. And you can see the line right here that I drew down the middle of the blank so that I could put it back together properly. What we're going to do is take our center find tool, and I'm going to find the center of both of these blanks. Not too bad. We should be able to drill right down the center of that one. This is a little tough on the Chaos blanks because they're not square, but this tool does a nice job of allowing me to find dead center. I'm going to use a standard punch. A nail would work just as well. And I'm going to put a little dot right at center so that I can hit it easier with my drill bit. And let's get these over to the drill press and get them drilled out. The Chicline uses a 7mm tube. I've chucked up a 7mm brad bit, and the point of that bit, I've already taken the time to line it up with our punch mark. All that's left is to drill completely through the blank. One down, one to go. I've got the holes drilled in my blanks, and I want to make one comment. Notice these blanks, they are wider than they are deep, and they also have a lot of different facets on them. So I went ahead and centered them with a centering tool, but even after you do that, you want to eyeball the blanks really well and make sure that you don't have a piece of wood that is going to be below the surface of where you're drilling. So use your best judgment on that and just take your time and you'll be fine. Before we glue the tubes into the blanks, there's 2 things we need to do. Number 1, see how shiny these tubes are? I'm going to go ahead and rough them up by just rolling them around on a piece of sandpaper. This puts a lot of scratches on the tubes and makes a nice surface area for the glue to stick to. Now that I've roughed up the tubes, I'm going to take a little bit of acetone and I'm going to clean the tubes. There could be oil or residue on them that would prohibit the glue from making a good hold on the tube. Not too long ago, I was in a pet store and I found this little bottle brush. I think I paid 99 cents, maybe $1.99 for it. I don't really remember, but I've been using it for cleaning out my blanks. Now, I primarily make Sierra styles, and it's perfect for 27/64" blanks. These are 7mm, quite a bit smaller, but that won't make a difference. It'll do a great job of cleaning the dust out of the inside of the blank before I glue up. Now, you want to remove that dust because it could soak up some of your adhesive and it could cause adhesion problems with the tubes. I'm ready to glue my tubes into my blanks, and I'm using a piece of tempered glass, and I really like this tempered glass because after the glue dries, I could take a razor blade and clean it right off. Doesn't matter if it's CA, Tite Bond, even epoxy, I'm able to scrape it right off the glass and clean it up. Taking a look at our blanks, you'll notice I've got the lines where they go together. I'm going to insert the tubes from this end, and I'm going to just barely put them below the surface because I want these ends to be as close as possible to mate up. I will be using medium CA glue. My preference is epoxy. CA is just going to have to make do. I only put this on half of the blank. I'm going to go ahead and put some CA glue inside the blank. I'm going to glue it up again, and I'm going to go to the other end, and I'm going to put some CA in there. It was recently brought to my attention by someone that if you don't put CA into both ends of the blank, as you put your tube in, when it reaches the other end, the CA could have been rubbed off and could be rather thin, which could cause you to not have good grip when you're turning. Now look at that. I am just maybe a 32nd below the surface. That's exactly what I want. We're going to do the same with this tube. I will start with the back side this time. That way when I go to the opposite side, I can go ahead and seat the tube. Whoops. My gloves are starting to kind of stick together because I've spilt CA on them, making it difficult to work, but we'll make do. And once again, I'm going to sink that just below the surface. That looks good. We'll set these aside to dry, and we'll be back shortly to square them up and take them to the lathe. The blank's squared up nicely. I'm going to go ahead now and use the bottle brush, and we're just going to clean the dust out of the middle. That way we don't have any issue with our bushings. I'm also going to inspect to see if there is any CA glue globbed up inside of the tubes. They look nice. If you see any CA glue in your tubes, I use a jeweler's file, and I just go in there and lightly file the CA away, and then I'll use my brush to clean out the dust from the filings, and that usually takes care of any issue with glue in the tube. I'm over at the lathe. I've got my blank ready to go, and we're going to use a special set of bushings today. These are really cool. I've been turning between centers, and Niels Matheson over at classicnib.com sent these to me. These are 7mm turn between center bushings. They've got the 60-degree cone cut in them, so they fit nicely on your drive center as well as your live center. And basically, we're going to turn this blank between centers. We'll start with the back blank. Go ahead and slide my bushings in. Lock her into place. And we're ready to turn. Before we turn, we're going to sharpen our tool. I always start by putting a little red permanent marker on the bevel. That lets me find the proper angle. We place it in the tool holder, drop our face mask, and sharpen. That tool's ready for the lathe. My first blank is ready for sanding. I am not going to show that on camera. It gets rather monotonous and boring. But what I'll do is I'll run through the grits 120, 220, 340, and 400. And then I'll come back and I'll polish this up with some Zona paper. And at that point, I'll show it to you. It'll be ready for a CA finish. But what I'll do is I'll set it aside. And once I get the bottom blank or the lower blank finished, and to the same point, I'll actually put them back on a mandrel and finish them with CA together. I want you to take a look at that blank. Is that not gorgeous? I have not put a single finish on that blank. I sanded it to 400 grit, and then I used Zona paper. Zona paper is a polishing cloth. Now on my acrylic blanks, I'll sometimes dampen it, but with wood, I just went ahead and used it dry. And basically you treat it like a piece of sandpaper. You just rub it back and forth on the blank and it takes the scratches out and really polishes that blank up to a beautiful finish. This Zona paper, I gotta say, it was given to me by Chad Schimmel. Chad is a really good friend of mine. He owns Turner's Warehouse, and he gave it to me to try, and I absolutely love what it does with the blanks. I'm going to take this blank and we're going to lay it over on the assembly bench for now. We're going to go ahead and turn the front half of the pin, and then we'll get this pin finished and put onto a kit. Here's a peek at the lower blank. And once again, all I've done is sand to 400 and run through the Zona paper. I'm going to get this put on the mandrel with the back half of the pin, and we'll continue on with getting a finish applied. So far, all we've done is sand and polish with Zona paper. And I'll be honest with you, I think the blank looks absolutely fantastic. Next step for me is to clean the blank with a little bit of denatured alcohol. We're going to give our blank just a few minutes to fully dry. You do not want to apply your CA until all of the denatured alcohol has evaporated from the blank, because if you do, the CA will trap that denatured alcohol below the surface, and as the CA cures and heats up, it could cause it to evaporate and literally fog your finish. My blank is completely dry, and I'm ready to go ahead and start applying the first coats of thin CA. Now, something to think about. When you're applying CA glue, do not use activator unless it's absolutely necessary. I attempt to avoid using activator at all costs. Usually what I'll do is just leave the lathe spinning and let the blanks dry, or the CA dry on the blanks naturally. I'll put 5 coats of a thin CA and then usually 3 coats of medium, and then I'll inspect the blank closely to see if all of the little grain is filled and the surface is nice and smooth. If it is, I stop. If it's not, I will add additional coats. I will occasionally shoot a spritz of activator on the very final coat of medium, but that is once all of the other coats have dried naturally. I try never to use activator. What happens with activator is it causes the CA glue to boil, and that boiling can cause the glue to crack. You'll get these little microscopic, not really microscopic, you can see them with the human eye, but you'll get these tiny little cracks all throughout your blank, and it looks really unsightly. You don't notice it from a distance, but if you look closely, you can see them. And once again, I did mention letting the denatured alcohol dry, because if there's any moisture in your blank, when that heat builds from the CA curing, that moisture will attempt to evaporate and it gets caught beneath the CA, creating a foggy surface. My first coats of CA, I always just like to hold the paper towel below the blank and just drool the CA on, wipe back and forth a couple times, wiping it right onto the bushings. That's what the bushings are there for. They are made of a Delrin, and the CA glue will stick to the Delrin, but it doesn't stick to the Delrin as bad as it will stick to, say, the normal metal or aluminum bushings. So I just literally wipe right off, taking the excess off. That way you don't leave a little blob out on the end of your blank. I'll let this sit and spin until the CA is dry, and you can kind of see it starting to get dull, so you know that it is drying. And it usually takes, it's pretty humid today, so it'll probably dry a little slower than normal. It usually takes about 15 to 30 seconds for that glue to completely dry and be ready for a second coat. You probably have noticed the tape on my finger. Some people use a plastic bag that the pin components come in. I like to put a little painter's tape on there. That way, as I'm wiping, if the CA soaks through the paper towel, you can see some of it on the tape. It doesn't get on your finger. It sticks to the tape, and then you just take that off your finger and toss it when you're finished. I'm ready for my second coat, and with the thin CA, I always apply the thin CA in the same manner, drooling it on the top and just running the rag back and forth across the bottom. That's coat number 2. I'm going to turn the camera off and I'll put the remaining 3 coats on as this blank dries and is ready to accept them. We'll come back when it's time to put the medium CA on, and we'll talk about that. I've got 5 coats of a thin CA applied. The blank is looking pretty good. There's still a few dull areas. The thin CA really sort of soaks in and seals the blank. Now I'm going to start building the finish up with a little bit of medium CA glue. The way I like to apply my medium is I like to put a bead about the size of a pea onto my paper towel, and then I just wipe it onto my blank. Put a little bit more on there. There we go. I'm used to doing Sierras, which only require 1 blank, so whenever I go back and do the fun lines or the slim lines, I've got to remember that I need just a little bit more. Now that blank looks pretty good. I've got a nice even layer of CA, and I wiped way off onto the blanks. I don't know if you could see it or not, but on this particular, bushings, on this particular bushing, it's kind of like yellowish here and like whiter there. This bushing has probably a 1/16 of an inch buildup of CA, and I took my tool, this one's completely cleaned off, but I cleaned off that section of the bushing with a tool because it will build up, because I wipe right off onto those bushings and just take all that excess CA glue away from the blank so I get the smoothest surface possible. I'm going to shut the camera off because with the medium CA, it takes quite a long time to dry, maybe 8 to 10 minutes. I'm just going to let the lathe sit here and spin. I'll go work on something else. I'll come back, I'll apply 2 more coats, and then we'll take a look at it together and decide if we need a 3rd coat. Sometimes with the walnut and other woods that have a lot of grain in them, you need to add 1 or 2 more coats just to really level the surface of the blank. I finished my 3 coats of medium, and as I turn the blank, I'm watching for grain, especially in this walnut. This blank has just a tiny bit of grain. I can see more grain right there. The best way to do it is you see that reflection of light. I know it's tough for you to see in the video, but when I look at that reflection of light, as you roll through it, you can see the depth of the wood. So it looks like the walnut. The rest of the wood looks pretty good. This piece right here has a little bit of grain, so I'm going to go ahead and apply at least 1 more coat, and then we'll check it again. I won't come back. I'll go ahead and continue to apply coats and check it until I get the surface nice and smooth. I'll let you know how many coats I did apply, and then we'll work on polishing the CA finish before we put the pin together. I ended up putting 2 more coats of CA on this blank for a total of 5. I really like how it's looking. The only issue I see, I don't know how well you can see it in the video, but there's a little bit of a lip here. I think what happened is there might have been a tiny gap between this piece and this little piece of walnut. And as I went across there, the CA would go into the gap, and as it would spin, it would come to the surface because there's a little bit of a lip there. We'll end up hitting that with probably some 400, then some 600 grit sandpaper just to smooth it out, and then we'll micro mesh this blank. We are ready to go to micro mesh. The next thing we need to do is get these non-stick bushings removed, and I'm going to go ahead and put some 7mm bushings on this mandrel, and I'll show you how I do that, because what's going to happen is these are kind of stuck to the blank. So I'll show you how I remove them, I'll show you how I clean them up, and then we'll put them back on the blank with the 7mm bushings, and we'll buff them with the micro mesh. I zoomed out a little bit so you can see the end of the blank. I'm going to go ahead and remove the knurl nut. Now, as I start to remove these, I'm going to twist a little bit. There we go. And notice that little fingernail there. Do not, under any circumstances, attempt to break that little fingernail off. Just chip it off or whatever. Leave it alone. I'll show you how we get rid of that in a second. Let's go ahead and twist there we go. There's a fingernail there. You're going to see those, and those little fingernails are caused by me wiping the CA onto the nonstick bushing. That's fine. We're going to bring this right down to the end, and then I'm just going to pop it loose. Okay, I'll lay it on my lathe. I'm keeping the proper orientation. Actually, let me walk and lay this. I want to keep well, actually, we'll be able to tell the proper orientation because we've got these two little light pieces of wood there in the center. So let me lay this aside. We'll go ahead and get our last blank off. There we go. Now we're going to go and clean the ends of these blanks up. I am back over at my disc sander, and I've got my squaring jig on the sander. We got our little fingernail there, and what we're going to do is we're going to put it right on the jig. I'm going to fire this up, and we're just going to roll it in with our finger and just lightly spin it against the disc. And you don't want to put too much pressure because you don't really want to remove any more of the blank or the tube. You just want to remove the fingernail. So if you just take your time, it's very easy to do. I've gone ahead and grabbed my bottle brush again, and I'm just going to run it through the blanks. And basically, as I was cleaning up the ends, any dust from the CA glue that might have worked its way into the blanks, I'm just taking it out. That way, there's no debris in the blanks when I go to press them together here shortly, and I won't have to worry about any issue pressing this blank or pressing the pin components into this blank. I've got the blank back on the lathe. It is properly lined up. This is the back blank or the cap, and this is the front blank where the nib will go. I am going to go ahead, I've got some 600 grit sandpaper, and I'm going to work on, actually I'll just sand both blanks equally, but I'm going to work to take this little lip down right here. I am going to wet this sandpaper. So we're dipping it in the water right now. It's nice and wet. I'm going to bump up the speed on the lathe to, we're coming up on about 800 RPMs. Don't want to go too fast. I can already feel the blank is sanding. I can already feel that CA glue leveling out, which is good. That's what I want. Keep the sandpaper nice and wet. That will keep all the heat down. Well, that feels really good. I do feel a rough spot right there. This 600 is not aggressive enough to really do a whole lot of damage to the blank. I mean, if you sanded really hard, you could take it down pretty far, but it's feeling really nice. Just feeling for any imperfections, and you'll feel them. Your fingers are very sensitive instruments. They will feel any imperfections in that blank. I still feel a little something right there. Let me wet this sandpaper again. Now it's gone. Whoops. Let me dry this blank off a little bit. Looks pretty good. It's a little bit dull, but that's okay. I'm ready to go ahead now and start micro meshing. I'm going to use the standard micro mesh. It has 9 pads, and we will use them from pad 1 through pad 9. We will wet them. Each time that we buff the blank, before I go to the next grit, you can see it's starting to kind of haze up where it's drying off, and I scratch the surface. That's good. Each time I switch between pads, I will wipe the slurry off the blank. That way, any grit that was left over from the previous pad will not sand or grind back into the blank. So I'm just going to go ahead and shut the camera off. We'll roll through the micro mesh. I'll come back in a few minutes and show you what it looks like. I just finished with the blank. I micro meshed it. Now the micro mesh, you could tell by the water all over the place here that I used the micro mesh wet. I let the blank dry, and then I went ahead and buffed it out with the Zona paper. I think the blank looks really nice. Next step is I've got a little bit of this Renaissance wax, and I'm going to put a little Renaissance wax on there to really kind of shine the surface up. It is smooth as glass, but let's see what happens. Now with this Renaissance, I like to just get some on my finger, and then basically use my finger to apply it to the blank. And just rub it back and forth. You'll know the lathe is running at about 800 RPMs, and it's moving quite freely right now. But what will happen is you'll start to feel some drag on your finger. That's when you know that you've buffed this in well enough. The nice thing about using your finger is if you were to use a paper towel, that paper towel is probably grittier than the finest grit of micro mesh. Therefore, you could put microscopic scratches back into your pen. Now right there, I'm starting to feel some drag. As I move across the blank, starting to feel drag in the middle and on the end. So this blank is done. Let me get a little more on my finger. And now we'll go ahead and do the front blank. And once again, we're just going to rub it on and keep moving our finger back and forth until we feel that drag. Start to feel some drag right there. There we go. Now the blank, it looks a little hazy. That's because you've got a wax on it, and that wax is drying. We're going to go ahead now and swap out this mandrel for our buffing wheels, and then we're going to buff this blank up. And that's where you're really going to see this blank shine. I've put my buffing wheels on the lathe. I'm going to leave the blank on the mandrel. That way I can run it across the wheels and polish the entire surface. I can work the whole blank without worrying about one of the wheels grabbing a blank and yanking it out of my hand and throwing it across the shop. Right now we're running at about 800 RPMs. I'm going to bump up to right about 1,000 RPMs. And we're just going to start buffing the blank. I'm ready to assemble my blanks into a pen, but there's one last thing I want to do to the blank. I've got a deburring tool, and I just want to run it through the blank, and it sort of cleans up any burrs on the brass tube, and it chamfers them just a little bit to make it easier to get the parts to slide into the blanks. One more time with the bottle brush just to ensure there are no little pieces of brass inside the tubes or no dust that could interfere with the assembly of the pen. This pen assembles like a standard slimline. We're going to start by putting the nib into one end of the blank. I'll push the ram back. And one last thing that I've been doing recently, this is one of my bushings. I'm going to go ahead and put this into the end of the blank. That way, when I'm pushing the nib into the blank, I'm pushing against the bushing, and the shoulder of the bushing is pushing against the brass tube. There's no chance, if this was in at a tiny bit of an angle, I could actually dent or damage the edge of the blank. But with the bushing in there, that's not going to happen. Now we're just going to go ahead and apply a little bit of pressure. And you can see that we have a beautiful fit right there. There is absolutely no lip that you can feel. Now let's work on our transmission. Been a long time since I've assembled a slimline style pin, so we're just going to push this into the brass, and then we're going to stop and we're going to check. I'm going to sneak up on this because I don't want to overshoot. Now you can see, let me see if I can get you up so you can see real well. I've got the nib extended. It needs to come out just a little bit more, so we're going to pop it in just a little more. I prefer to sneak up on these, instead of just assuming, because you never know when you're squaring the blank, if you take a little bit of brass away, that could make the tube a bit shorter. So you want to watch out for things like that. So we're just going to push this about halfway, that little line there. I'm going to push it about halfway in. There we go. It's best to sneak up on it. Now that is perfect. Let's take a closer look at that. There you go. Perfect extension of the ink cartridge. I'm very, very happy with that. We'll slide the little trim ring on. Now let's grab our cap. Let's see. I tell you what, I think I'm going to put the cap right down the center of the walnut. Once again, I'm going to use this bushing to protect my blank. We're going to start it, and then I'm going to pull it off the press, and notice I am not quite centered. Before it's pressed all the way in, I have the opportunity to adjust it by hand. And let's go ahead now and press it the rest of the way into the blank. There we go. Very happy with that. When a pin is closed, that's when it should line up. So I'm going to go ahead and line these two little pieces up. And now you can take a look at the pin. See the little filigree there? Really a beautiful pen. I think you guys made a wise choice on the blank and the kit, and I really like it. I'd really like to thank you guys for joining me tonight, but mostly I'd like to thank you for voting. Those of you on the other channel who voted, that means a lot to me because it tells me the type of things that you would like to see coming out of my shop and making a video for you guys. And I really, really love how this pen turned out. I think this is a neat kit. If you want to do a slimline, this is just a little bit of a step up from a slimline. A little filigree on the back really just gives it a nice look. And it's got a super nice fit at the nib, super nice fit in the center and at the cap, so I couldn't be happier with that. Been a while since I turned a slimline pen, so I was a little nervous about the fit. Those new bushings, I think, were the trick. Had I used my old bushings, I may not have hit it quite so nicely. This was a fun pen to do. I'll let you guys know my wife stopped into the shop a few minutes ago, and she's already claimed this one, so it's going straight from the shop to her purse. I'd like to thank you for joining me in the shop, and I want you to know that you are always welcome in my shop. Come back and see me again real soon, and have a wonderful evening.